Qwilt. We're a software and cloud services company. Just quickly, we sell our software to big service providers, so we've got some real-world experience in this that I'm going to share with you. But first, let's talk about the edge. I don't want to, if you were there, how many people were here at the 9 o'clock keynote by Ericsson? Okay, so you have some of that context as well. So there is certainly a consensus, I think. Some people like Peter Levine and Andreessen Horowitz, who says, you know, the cloud is dead. That's a little extreme. The keynote topic this morning was CDNs are dead, also very extreme, probably not exactly right for the audience, but this is not our message that, you know, the CDN industry is dead or is not relevant. It's more relevant than ever, but what we're seeing now is an opportunity to rethink the architecture in important ways, to build the kind of scale, quality, cost-effective capacity that's needed. And what you're hearing from people like Peter Levine, who say, you know, the role of the centralized cloud, and if you don't believe Peter, surely you believe The Economist. I mean, what other objective publication is there in the world? But it's the same theme, which says, you know, there was and has been and will be a role for the centralized cloud. But given what we want to do, given the use cases that are coming, it's not enough. Maybe one of the best pieces, if you've ever heard Marcus Waldron from Nokia, he's the CTO of Nokia Bell Labs, the CTO of Nokia, the president of Bell Labs, which is now run by Nokia. He's published a piece called The Future X Network. How many people have seen any part of this? Any of you who've seen any bit of this? It's a really powerful publication. And, you know, in short, and I'm going to bring now some of the data from this publication, he says there are three dimensions that we need to solve for going forward. We need to solve for latency, and you heard this morning a lot of time spent on the importance of latency going forward in delivery and capacity and quality and enabling new applications. We're a strong believer in this. In this case, there's room, he says, for the service provider edge cloud, the edge cloud, the idea that we activate a cloud infrastructure based on general compute at the very edge of the network, let's say where IP first appears in the network, so inside the RAN, for the fixed line network, sitting down in every neighborhood, let's say at the CMTS, the BRES, the DSLAM, because the latency matters, and the light blue here is what they view as the minimal latency, or I should say the maximum tolerable latency for these kinds of applications. So to deliver high-def 4K live streaming at scale, to deliver AR, VR, 360-degree video, and you can see the other apps, we really need to manage to this extremely low latency network, and this is at one of the pillars at the heart of the idea that a service provider edge cloud is needed. Just like today a centralized cloud exists from Amazon, Google, others, you can buy it. Tomorrow, this edge cloud, new service provider edge cloud, this massively distributed cloud will be required as well. Not only to scale what we have and the streaming that we want to do, it's not just about media, but also to enable the new applications you can see. Lots of IoT applications, autonomous cars, not just consumer apps, but enterprise apps. And Marcus would even tell you there's a case that the control plane itself should move in some cases from the centralized cloud out to the edge in order to enable this. And the other dimension of this is the bandwidth needed. And this is just a quick view that says if you look at what's needed to drive VR, AR types of applications, and remember again, those aren't just consumer apps. Those could easily be enterprise apps. Maybe they're more reliably going to be enterprise apps because that's where the money will be to invest in that kind of experience. And if you want to do that using a network, you're going to push a ton of capacity into that network. And we should perhaps be designing for 60x the capacity that we're thinking about today. And some people will, debate whether for 4K or for maybe for VR, you don't need 100 megabits per second or something extraordinary. Maybe you can do it for 20 or 18. I'm not sure that changes the problem domain at all. And I used this in another presentation. If you look at the record broadcast audiences over the years. Many have exceeded 1 billion concurrent viewers, right? So the opening of the Olympics in China, for example, was an example. There's a famous cricket match between Pakistan and India that commanded 1.3 billion, if you kind of roughly believe the audience. That happens. Hundreds of millions of viewers happens all the time. We spoke with a large content provider in Brazil, Globo. If you know them, they say they put on a Super Bowl every night because every night they have over 100 million broadcast viewers. The largest concurrent streaming live event, you can look at Akamai data and so forth, maybe it was 5 million. I think I'm giving that a little bit of extra room. It was probably 3 to 5 million. And we have some CDNs in the room who probably can tell me maybe it was a little bit more than that. But again, it doesn't matter. We have a 2 order of magnitude task to scale this for the kinds of audience that we think we will eventually need to address. And the task is made harder because more and more bandwidth is going to be consumed along the way. So what does that mean? The Service Provider Edge Cloud is simply put the idea of a universal or open cache system running on general commodity compute, highly distributed throughout the edge of the service provider network. In this case, these are all in-network caches, but it could easily include a cache in the home as well. The set-top box, the wireless gateway could be activated as a cache that would do its job just like the in-service provider network cache I'm referring to here. But the idea is create for the service provider an edge cloud so they can become a participant in the end-to-end value chain, right? So they can be part of the delivery. They can contribute the reach, the scale, the expertise they have at running these phenomenal networks to the problem. And so that I'm not saying that OTT as a notion goes away, but OTT, I think the notion of it, it doesn't feel right because it's sort of like a crime is being committed on the service provider, if you will. That's kind of tongue-in-cheek. But what we really want is the service provider to be a part of the content delivery value chain. Why do they want this? Because, as you'll see in a little bit, they have a huge incentive to create a more efficient content delivery network architecture within their network because there's a massive benefit. If they can dedupe, if you will, all those massively redundant streams, take all the redundant streams and have them emanate or originate from a cache that's in the neighborhood, there's a huge benefit of offload in the upstream network path all the way through aggregation core and out to wherever they appear. That's one dimension of this, right? The second is they can now be a part of the delivery so that the OTT streams aren't a black box to them. It's a way in which they can help deliver value to the end user. And the third we think is possible, maybe not today, but as time goes on, having this capability activates new business models, new revenue streams, potentially new use cases around which there's opportunity for them as a service provider. This is the very same point that was made in the keynote this morning. So this idea, which at the moment, let's just say it's an idea, we've made tremendous progress in the last couple of years, we think is architecturally sound. And I always like to return to the notion of truth in architecture. This is not new. Witness, Netflix, OpenConnect. How many people by just chance were here a few years ago when Ken Florence gave a keynote from Netflix? He was running the CDN at the time. Did anyone hear that? Okay, a few of you. So Netflix was here a few years back. They were using commercial CDNs. They were just getting started. And they looked ahead and decided to build out their own architecture, a private CDN. Makes perfect sense. And as a part of that, they absolutely acknowledged the need, the desire, maybe the necessity to put a cache inside the service provider network. Nowhere near the edge as I'm suggesting we do, but no one's disagreeing that architecturally they wanted that solution. Same for Google. For any of you who are familiar with the global cache that they operate, the notion is the same, and the truth is the same for Facebook rather. These aren't all necessarily sitting in the service provider network, but that's where they want to go. And the list could go on. We could talk about Akamai and, any CDN who's really working at this wants to push a cache into the service provider network. What we're saying is that in this process, we want to create a universal and open cache for the sake of the ecosystem and put that in the network. Just like there's a router that sits inside of the aggregation and access networks that handles everyone's traffic, have a cache that can do the same thing. So that the reach, the scale of the service provider operation can be brought to bear on the task. Okay, so what do we need to do in order, I talk about crossing the chasm, and I'm going to suggest to you that we're doing that. Maybe we've done it. What do we need to do in order to make this happen? I would submit we need to do these things. One is to gather ecosystem support, because I'm not talking about just an interesting product that we might go and present to a service provider and see what happens. I'm saying we need to align collaboratively the entire ecosystem to get the task done. We need open specifications. Because that's the way to solve this in a smart way, is to make this open. Anyone can build any part of the solution and participate. We need deployments and we need integrations. So let's work through these each quickly because as I said, I'm going to make the case we've crossed the chasm here. And we'll start with the Streaming Video Alliance. So as a part of this process, we, 4+ years ago, were one of the founding members of the Streaming Video Alliance. It's meeting here in New York on Thursday. And there's well over 50 member companies now. Amazon has joined recently. I understand that there's another major web company who's going to announce that they're joining this week without trying to disclose who that is. But the beauty of this organization is we have the entire ecosystem in place. So major content providers, the major commercial CDNs, the service providers of all types, cable, telco, mobile, and then the rest of the industry, the tech industry, and in respect to the speaker who was just here, companies who are doing business around quality of experience. How do you measure it, report it, optimize for it? Companies that are doing business around CDN load balancing. The entire ecosystem is in place. This is a great forum in which to advance a particular agenda, like open caching, the idea of the service provider edge cloud. And it's also a great forum in which to gather together quickly a group of people end-to-end who can then put to test these kinds of notions. And a few of the folks are in the room. Limelight's here. BAMTech is here. We've already done some work to prove out these concepts. So what have we done to align the industry? I'm going to do this quickly, is to say that we have specified now really fully the performance, the operation of an open caching system. So that idea that I've mentioned to you, this massively distributed cache content delivery layer inside the service provider network, it has been fully specified from the standpoint of service provisioning, from the standpoint of request routing, logging, and content management. What does this mean? It means that now we have a fully endorsed, unanimously improved by the body of the Streaming Video Alliance that I mentioned earlier, the specifications that describe how this massive caching layer, let's call it the final edge delivery layer, the service provider edge cloud, behaves, and most importantly, the APIs that'll let someone upstream, a commercial CDN, a major private CDN, use it for content delivery. And I'm not suggesting that it's going to be used for every single case of delivery, because there's probably plenty of use cases, maybe small object web acceleration and others, that don't necessarily need the latency or the capacity or performance of the service provider edge cloud. But there are plenty of cases that do, we think strongly. Live streaming video, for example, maybe VOD, maybe super high def 4K streaming. Certainly new use cases around AR and VR all will need this. So this is done. This effort is finished. The publications are approved, and they're all available on the Streaming Video Alliance site. Anyone, a member or not, can download those, build the compliant product, and deploy it. So there's the ecosystem support. And I'm going to say now, just to pull from the past, crossing the chasm, that we were there maybe a couple years ago. We're here now, and that's because in the list that I've given you, we've really moved down the list in terms of getting the ecosystem support. What do we want them to do? To endorse, to embrace, to deploy. We have customers like Verizon, just one of the public customers who've announced that they've deployed this capability. There are others, Telecom Italia, but there are plenty of others that aren't public yet. Big cable companies in the US, major tier 1 providers in Asia, Europe, Latin America, Middle East and Africa. We have an announcement of a partner with Limelight where we have an integration working with them so that they can get access to this very infrastructure I've been describing. And I want to share some data from a couple case studies quickly, and then I'll wrap up for questions. So we have some real-world evidence of the performance of the service provider edge cloud, these open caching systems, and trying to do their job. So the first one is the Super Bowl. And in this case, just to make the point simply that this edge cloud now, you can imagine this massively distributed set of common compute systems running open caching, can act like essentially a multicast system at the edge of the access network. So think about this as a way in which we maybe mimic or replicate the effect of broadcast-like experience, but do it with streaming. So we have all the good of streaming. You can stream to any device, wherever you happen to be. But in this case, the open cache can pick up a popular live stream and then effectively using IP multicast, multicast it down through the access network, so a vastly more efficient method to get many streams, millions of streams out to users who want to view them. The service provider has a huge incentive to deploy this kind of technology because of the offload impact and the QoE benefit it delivers. And so we have, as I said, a number of, this is just US data, but you can see now that the behavior of the open cache in these kinds of examples starts to really essentially look like a CDN. And yet the cache is sitting in a location that I would submit it would be very hard, maybe almost impossible for any single private, commercial or private CDN to push their cache to that place, because most service providers aren't going to open the door and say, sure, let's let 30 different private caches sit in a rack in this little neighborhood. But one universal cache that can do the task for everyone, yes. One that they control, if you will, and have invested in, and one that helps them create a more efficient delivery within their network, absolutely. One that enables potentially the new business models, yes. This is where the motivation happens. And then the other dimension of this, and I'm just touching on some quick results so you get a picture of it. We've measured more than this. It would be average time to first byte. There was a question earlier about, what is the essence of, a good quality stream. I think most people would agree you want to measure things like rebuffering rates, time to first byte, and probably something that looks like the average bit rate for streaming. So just to make sure it's clear, the blue, that's good. Shorter time to first byte is better. The blue at the bottom, that steady rate, is the open cache. And then the yellow up above, it's taking longer, not so good. That's the sort of upstream entity that's, in this case, streaming this particular event down into this network segment where we measured. I'm giving you a few bits of data from a particular service provider. We've instrumented this pretty substantially. And we also have, the question came up earlier, that we also have third-party arrangements. We're on the Sodexis platform, so it can be measured independently. And then naturally for those CDNs or content providers who have their own clients and can measure on their own, in their view, completely objectively the performance, we have data that basically arrives at the same conclusion. Let's just make it simple. The open cache, now that you understand where it's sitting, it has just an unfair advantage. I mean, it's running a 50-yard dash, and everybody else is running a mile. So this is a huge advantage, and you can see why service providers are interested. I'll give you one other study. This is a private CDN, not to be named, but again, the use of this infrastructure is available to both commercial CDNs and large private CDNs who don't use commercial CDNs, of course. And in this case, we have an instance where, again, just a little snapshot of traffic from a particular network segment. This is actually not in the US at all. It's from Asia. But you can get a sense. So major CDN where we had been supporting only transparent delivery, we enabled open caching delivery. So now we have proactive delivery of content through real delegation that takes place from the private CDN to an open cache in this network. By doing this, we have substantially greater cache hit rates, and maybe most important, from the left, before transparent only, from the right, transparent plus open caching, you can see that we more than doubled the total traffic being delivered by the open cache by activating the delegation use case, where now the CDN is proactively, they know where the cache is, they know where the request has come from. They say, I've got an open cache in that network segment where that request has come from. I'm going to delegate, give the heavy lifting to the open cache, and let that happen. And you have to add the two charts to get to the 225% increase, but the simple point is here, we now have a cache deep inside, in this case, an Asian operator, deep inside their network, a highly distributed set of caches where essentially it's acting like an extension of the commercial, or in this case, the private CDN. An extension of that infrastructure, which we think, frankly, creates the best of all circumstances, more capacity available for peak events, substantially higher quality. You saw the time to first byte measure. And then in our view, it's difficult to say this in a broad way, but in our view, at least the same, but very, very likely better economics, cost economics for the CDN, private or commercial, than they could have achieved on their own. As several people said, I think it was said by the keynote, the 9 o'clock keynote, the cost to try to create this architecture on your own, if you're a CDN, private or public, even if you have a ton of money, even if you're such a big private CDN that maybe you don't even have to follow the law of gravity like some of the big web companies are, the cost and time is extraordinary. So why not simply give this task to big service providers who are in the business of operating massive infrastructure, deploying it and managing it, and let them become a participant in the value chain. This is at the heart of what we want to do. And what we're saying to CDNs is, look, there's a small set of APIs. They're specified by the Streaming Video Alliance. And through those, you can get access now to a worldwide open cache infrastructure distributed across a vast number of major Tier 1 service providers. In the case of the private CDN that I just mentioned, their conclusion was, I'll take this all day, every day. Why wouldn't I, if I have the opportunity to give you the job to deliver, assuming you can do it well, and you continue to show me the data that that's true, I'll take you up on it, because this is the right way for the industry to evolve. As I said, truth in architecture. So what's coming up? More of everything, just to kind of wrap things up, and more use cases. So what we're seeing now is, as I said, crossing the chasm, more willingness, readiness for both CDNs, private and commercial, to integrate, for both, and for the service providers to adopt and deploy. It's kind of a two-sided market, you can imagine, because each one asks how many are on the other side. Each one says, well, I want this to be meaningful. There needs to be a fair amount of traffic here to get my attention. Of course, those are all reasonable things. Our message, frankly, is you as CDNs can, commercial or private, can help accelerate the very future that you probably want to achieve. We say the same thing to the service providers that we speak to. This is without question the future of content delivery, media delivery, and so on. And as I said, this idea is not that the open cache delivers everything. It's that you, the CDN, can decide where you would rather have a delegation to a open cache in the neighborhood that can do the task in a perfectly acceptable way, and you can carry on in your business. It creates the scale, I think, that we all need to make this work. Probably finished a little bit early, but maybe I can stop for questions, comments, anything at all. Yes?
Yeah, is there a rights chasm
Yep.
And then there's probably retransmission consent consideration of storing and retransmitting and all of that stuff. So is the ultimate case for open caching other stuff besides over-the-top video, like IoT apps, or will genuine video actually, over-the-top video will
Yeah.
actually get there? Can it get there?
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe just to quickly summarize the question, because it's an excellent one, which is what I heard was, look, is this for kind of everything else? Because Google, maybe you're not going to get that. Facebook, other big properties, that's a lot of content already. And then what about the rights? What about the service provider's rights to get cache and retransmit? Is that also an issue? So let me take these, and then I heard one more issue, which I'll take on as well. So 3 things here to be clear. First, there is a major web company who is going to be joining the Alliance on Thursday. You'll hear that name announced. So I think that we're seeing more. Amazon's on board, as you already saw. We're seeing the movement in the right direction. And this is just me now speaking, but look, at the moment, Facebook, Netflix, even really Google, with a minor exception, none of them are building out major broadband wireless capabilities. None of them seem to have the aspiration to become the ISP in addition to everything else. It's assumed that the infrastructure is there, broadband, be it fixed or wireless or otherwise, and soon 5G, that will allow people to reach their services. We believe, in the same way, that they will eventually come to depend on those same infrastructure companies, service providers, to create this massive content delivery network infrastructure that's needed to scale the very kinds of experiences they want to achieve, AR, VR, and so forth. So that's one. That's just a principal view. To the specific questions, so there is a ton of the rest that's coming. If you look at one of the folks on our board is Joe Inzerillo, CTO of BAMTech, now part of Disney. You can just read publicly the aspirations they have to become a huge streaming entity. They want to leverage service providers. And as we talk to other major content providers and certainly the other major commercial CDNs, the common theme is they want to leverage service provider networks to get to the scale and capacity they want to achieve. Even if you take and set aside for the moment Google, Facebook from the equation, even Netflix, it doesn't matter because the demand will be such that it'll still more than justify the kind of investment that we think service providers want to make. That's part 2. And then on the rights part, there's 2 parts to this. There is a lot of work that's already been done, legal and regulatory work, that says very precisely service providers have the right to temporarily cache and deliver content as a part of a broad network management function that they can use to optimize their network. This part is very clear, very clean, tons of precedent. Moreover, the moment we invoke open caching, now we have a proactive, collaborative relationship between the service provider and the upstream entity, commercial CDN or content provider. So that permission is inherent in the process, if you will. So there's no longer a man-in-the-middle problem when you have collaborative open caching, real delegation taking place. There is a real partnership that happens within the industry. Taken together, this is it's green lights across the board, I think, in terms of where we want to go. And again, even if Facebook decides that they'll go their own way, the motivation is massive. And I think certainly if you look at what Facebook is doing on the edge, same for Google, you'll see the common thing. They want to work with service providers. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm sorry, how does the business model work? Who do you charge in carriers?
I'll describe our business model and then more generally about open caching. Our customer is the service provider, the ISP, so it's somebody like a Verizon, or a Comcast. We charge them for software and for cloud services. They, in turn, invest, of course, in the general compute platform that creates the edge cloud. But as I said, they're massively motivated to do so because of the financial benefit of this effort. As I mentioned before, open caching is open, so anyone can download the specs, build compliant products, and construct their own business model. I think this is, still where things will be sorted out, but that's ours for now. Yep. Any other in the very back there?
So just by devil's advocate, you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier you didn't think a service provider would want 30, 40% cache and operate
Yeah.
deploying the network. Traditionally, service operators, last mile operators, make a lot of money buying from telcos.
Yeah.
They make a lot of money from charging other operators further up stacks to operate in those last mile environments.
Right.
So I can't just play devil's advocate.
Reconcile those two.
Operators, you have to cache out there.
Yeah. Correct. So the question here was, well, hang on. Operators make money charging third parties colo. So how does that square with this open caching thing? And let me say in the simplest way, that model may continue because it may be that service providers still have a colo operation. I'm going to call it up at the top of the network, maybe up at the core near where peering takes place. And sure, they have a little data center where they have a caching rack and they put people's caches there. That's a very different and that's a different division of the business than who we're talking to. But that operation is very different than taking all those racks, replicating them 1,000 times, and putting them in every neighborhood across their network. No, it may be money, but it's sort of like free like puppies problem, because the moment they say yes to that kind of model, I think, one, they've created an operational nightmare. That can't scale. Maybe there's some money, but they've also, and most importantly, probably given up so much control over what's happening with their network that you really wonder if that's the right way to motivate. Many of these are just black boxes. And so if you're just going to take those racks and just like copy paste throughout your entire network, if that is the future, then you have to ask them, well, why would you invest in such a future? I mean, you've sort of handed the keys to whoever's boxes you're putting there. And at least the theme is that we talk to service providers is they don't want to go that way, but they need an alternative. This is the alternative that we think they can invest in. Very good question. Any final? Yes?
For live, I think I understood you say that you've got support, I don't know if this is in the FDA section up, but for downstream multicast, is that true? And also, what about upstream? To get to the cache, can you multicast for live?
So the question was about live specifically and how is it defined, this multicast support. So I'll talk about it in a couple different ways, just to be clear. So live streaming is one of the clearly viable use cases fully defined in the open caching specifications from the Streaming Video Alliance. And it includes the idea of a kind of IP layer multicast across the access network. This should not be confused with what I'll call multicast ABR, which is the inside of the access network with the smart node in the home, the ability to do multicast of a variety of different use cases. That's different. It's being looked at in the Streaming Video Alliance, but it's not yet been specified as part of this capability. You mentioned like an equivalent upstream multicast broadcast capability, not yet part of what we've done. So our focus has been downstream live multicast. Yep. I think I may be out of time, but I don't even see an organizer trying to yank me. Maybe one last question, but you're trying to leave. I can feel it from the crowd. So, yes.
So, it appears to me that a lot of the content providers have been really successful penetrating service providers with appliances.
Yeah.
Do more than caching. I'm hearing things that, those appliances might go into towers through tower providers.
Yep.
Inside devices like cars themselves, inside the home where the products. Why suddenly have to go open into being a service provider, and what do you do about the countries that don't have tier 1 service providers, and you have to do a lot of different service providers
Sure.
that are run and trust their cloud hosting?
Yeah, so the question is, there are perhaps other approaches, and what about the case where a service provider, there isn't a major tier 1 service provider, they don't have this kind of capability deployed. I mean, the beauty of this really is that it can be used where it's available, and upstream commercial and private CDNs have the intelligence to be able to selectively know, okay, I've got a request from in the US, it's served by a place where I have a cache, I'll delegate and off we go. And where those things don't exist, eventually they certainly will, but we'll use our current infrastructure. I think that's fairly straightforward. There are examples of people who've come in with various appliances. Again, I'll say third parties, and they're supporting maybe streaming plus other use cases, and that's interesting. And as I said, because the question had come up earlier, some of that may continue, but in terms of a broad and universal solution, it's hard for us to see the future unfolding in a different way than what we're describing here, because the service provider's motivation to invest is tied so directly to their desire to be part of the value chain, part of the end-to-end value proposition, have some control over it so that they can really optimize what's happening in their network. I'll add to this point, there's one other development which is in the area of mobile edge, or now called multi-access computing, which is maybe now a precursor to 5G, but there is another window into which these kinds of caches can be inserted, and deeper inside the mobile network, the same kind of efficiency can happen. With 5G, it'll just get easier, but we have a few partners now where we're seeing this kind of thing happen even today. And the proposition around a mobile edge compute kind of use case where you have an open cache and now the service provider is really an active participant in that optimization, it's just really irresistible to the service providers as we see it. Okay, we've used all the time. Thanks very much for your time. Have a good day.